Hey buddy, how you doing?
How's it going?
Good, good. Just got back from the beach, had a bite to eat, so can't complain.
Oops. Sorry, I took a snapshot. I meant to go full screen. Yeah, you're in Thailand.
I am in Thailand. You're looking very Canadian over there.
And then, you said, are you good for video? I mean, I'm good for video between you and I. I don't know if it's too kosher. Are you recording this to put it on like YouTube or something?
Yeah, I usually just take the raw video file and throw it up on YouTube. I mean, you look perfect to me, man. So don't apologize for that.
I'm
The,
telling you,
the,
the reason why I'm wearing a hat is because it's starting to get a bit cold. It's fall here, and the office heater is not working, so it's like colder inside than it is outside. So
I think what you mean
gotta
is
keep wearing.
you're passing on all the savings to the customers, right? This is intentional. You're not heating the office so that you
There you
can
go.
make it cheaper to trade on Shakepay. Well, look, man, thanks for taking the time. I'm excited to talk about this because I'm Canadian myself. Actually, I'm from Newfoundland originally, and
Hey,
you know, I've always this. I don't. I'll get your opinion on this, of course, because you'd be much. You're much closer to it. But my impression, I've been living outside of Canada for about the last 10 years. But my impression was always just that uh, Canada was sometimes I'd be excited that it was kind of ahead of the curve in some ways in regards to Bitcoin, and then in other ways like compared to the U.S. Of course, it seemed like the ecosystem was far less developed and far less diverse. And I've tried a lot of the products and solutions and wallets and exchanges and that kind of stuff that have come out of Canada. And I'm actually, full disclosure, I'm a user of Shakepay, and I find it to be the best way to acquire Bitcoin, let's say, that I've come across thus far in the Canadian market. So congratulations on that.
thanks, man. That means a lot.
So I mean, maybe the best place to start is just I know you've done these a few times, but give me the rundown and kind of why Shakepay, why now, where you guys are at.
I mean, Shakepay is a bit of an old story. We're almost coming up on 4 years that we started. 4 years ago we started Shakepay. If you Google Shakepay, I mean, you'll start seeing things like a prepaid debit card. Things were shut down. I mean, there's a bit of a story behind what we're doing at Shakepay and why. Is this the right time to go through it?
Yeah, go for it.
Happy to.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, look, Shakepay started. It was two guys in Montreal. We're both from Montreal. We kind of studied together, university. Um, Roy, who's my co-founder, he was working at Morgan Stanley. He was working in the financial division, and we were just chatting. I mean, I'd been messing around with Bitcoin, and what really got me excited about Bitcoin was its programmable aspect. I'm an engineer. I'm a developer by somewhat nature, and I found it really exciting that you'd be able to program money. And I think some of the things that we take for granted in the Bitcoin space is that you don't need anyone's permission. You could just download a node, run some scripts, and you're now moving money cross border. And I was really excited about that. The economics and its profound effect on the world kind of comes after you learn that you could just run a script, you can move money cross border, no one can stop you, and you don't need anyone's permission. I found that to be really, really powerful, and that's really what got me into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I approached my buddy Roy. Said, hey, we got to start messing around with this stuff. It's really exciting, and we started Shakepay kind of like a side project, kind of messing around on weeknights, on the weekend, and we eventually came upon this idea of, look, I have Bitcoin and I want to be able to spend it. I want to be able to use it, and it kind of came like an epiphany moment where we were sitting at a bar. I don't know if you've been to Montreal.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years. I don't know if the bars still exist, but there's this bar called Benelux. On Sherbrooke and it's actually Jean Amiouny. Not sure if you're familiar with it. Anyway, it's like a student bar. A lot of young folk frequent this bar, and we're sitting at the bar and we're talking about this Bitcoin idea. And the waitress comes over. She gives us a check for the beer. And we say, hey, can we pay in Bitcoin? This is what 2014, 2015. Yeah, this is before the big, the big price jump in 2017. No one really knows what Bitcoin is. And so she looks at it, she's like, what? And she shoves the terminal in our face. And so that kind of gave us the idea of like, look, it'd be really, really cool if we could use our Bitcoin to pay for our day-to-day transactions. And that's what initiated, I guess, the company that is Shakepay today.
Right. And so, as you said, you've been around for, I guess, 5 years, and so the incarnation today is this very sleek, very minimal, wallet/exchange way of converting fiat into Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Ethereum's on the,
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Bitcoin Ethereum, that's right.
And man, like, for people listening who are in Canada, especially who haven't tried it, like, and actually, I'll just ask you this question straight up now. How is it so fast? Because I've used other such products, and I'm all like, not only is it often quite slow, either from the depositing, and it's still the same way, Interact e-transfer. People outside Canada won't know what that means, but Interact e-transfer to fund the account, super slow in other service providers, and then the exchange rate at Shakepay seems to be one of the best. And then on withdrawal, like if you're withdrawing BTC, it's fucking fast as shit. Like what accounts for that? How do you guys make that happen? And why is there such a disparity between those qualities in what you guys do and the other players in the market?
Yeah, so maybe just some background for your non-Canadian folks. I mean, an Interact transfer is this email protocol that somewhat exists in Canada. It's been here for 20 years now. It basically works like this. You go to your bank, you initiate a transfer, you say to whom you're sending it to, and that's usually an email address. And then you put in a security question and an answer that only the recipient would know.
Or use your online banking, right? So you don't have to go to the bank, but you can use your online banking app. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So you go online, that's right. And the recipient then gets an email with a special link. It's somewhat loaded with money if you know the password of that. You're trying to think of it like as it's locked it's locked money with a password. And so you click on that link, it brings you to your own online banking, put in the password, and boom, you get money. And so what we've done is we've leveraged this technology that's existed for a couple of years now in Canada. And I mean, the idea behind why we wanted to go on the e-transfer route was it's usually what Canadians use to pay each other, right? It's the peer-to-peer protocol in Canada. You pay your rent, you pay someone back for dinner. It's usually done through an e-transfer. And so Canadians are used to sending e-transfers. So we decided, hey, let's see what we could do with the e-transfer protocol. And so we started accepting e-transfers. And maybe back to your point, you asked how is it so quick? It's I guess the fundamental reason why we went down this road was because we wanted to emulate how fast it would be to transact on the blockchain. When you send Bitcoin from one address to another, it hits the mempool right away. A couple of minutes later, it'll hit its first confirmation, and boom, and your recipient has money. And we always really liked the quick speed of transaction on the blockchain. So I guess we were inspired by how transactions happen in Bitcoin, and want to emulate that in the fiat space. And I think that's what's really, really difficult. In Canada, if you're sending a bank-to-bank transfer, I mean, this takes a couple of days. You don't know where it is in the meantime. You might initiate it in the morning. It might get sent out the next day. It might take 2 days to hit the bank account. And so, yeah, I guess we were inspired by how fast things happen on the blockchain, and we tried to bring it as quickly as it would work in the fiat space.
Yeah. But I guess my question is, how do you accomplish that, both for the funding and for the withdrawal?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously automated a lot of things in our system. I mean, early days we would initiate a lot of things when they would come in by hand, and now things kind of go in and out automatically. Without getting too much into the details, I mean, it's really gone to a point where we've built a whole system behind just depositing and withdrawals of Interact transfers, and that's why 24/7. I mean, it'll hit your bank account right away, and if there's any delay, usually it's because Interact transfers sometimes puts a delay on sending out just a notification that you'd get when you receive an e-transfer.
And when you send out BTC, is it just a normal BTC transaction?
Yeah, that's a normal one. I mean, I think most one thing that we don't do, for example, is we don't do transaction batching. So each withdrawal, each Bitcoin withdrawal will be its own transaction, which is why it goes out really quickly.
Do you pay
Um,
a higher fee to get it out faster?
Definitely. I mean, we're definitely in a point where we've prioritized speed over cost. I suspect at some point in the future, transaction batching may make sense to us, but I don't think we're at that space where we're getting multiple withdrawals within a minute or so.
Yeah, because for like a non-lightning transaction, I've always been super wowed by the speed at which, like you send it from the wallet and it ends up in wherever you're storing them, like really fast.
Yeah, it should get there in a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
We send out the withdrawal right away.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so I mean, this is obviously one of the choke points, or potentially one of the choke points. The on ramps are always discussed, especially in terms of if the pressure ever kind of mounts on Bitcoin from state actors and stuff. But even I imagine, what's the experience been like? Being a bridge between the legacy system and this new financial system that we're all trying to be a part of in Canada. Like, what's been the response from regulators and banking partners? Like, are they receptive? Are they skeptical? Do you have to do a lot of extra work? Like, what's that been like?
I mean, certainly on the banking side, it's very difficult. I mean, in the US, for example, you've got 800 and so institutions competing against each other, whereas in Canada, it's really somewhat centralized at the top. You have these five big banks, they're the most profitable companies in Canada, and they essentially dictate to the smaller, let's say, credit unions or other Schedule I banks in Canada how things work. They're the big guys on the block, and so it's been quite difficult to deal in the space. And, any crypto company in Canada will struggle getting just a bank account, being able to receive payments from your customers, which is, I would guess it's something that'll change over time. We've certainly seen banks open up to dealing with crypto companies, but I would say that that's probably the biggest difficulty for any crypto company in Canada. On the regulation side, I mean, there's new laws that are coming in June that are going to start regulating crypto transactions, so buying and selling Bitcoin. FinTrack, which is the money service regulator in Canada, and the AMF, the one in Quebec, have released some new regulations, but those aren't really in effect. And
what kind of regulations will they be? Like, what will they be regulating?
So they're going to be regulating essential. So money service business transactions are typically along the lines of check cashing, money transferring between two parties, either internal or external to Canada, so like remittance. And the third one is foreign exchange dealing. They're adding a new activity, which is virtual currency dealing. And so they're actually defining what it is to be a virtual currency, which is really interesting. I think they got their definition a little bit off, but it's probably, it could probably be improved. But they're essentially treating any cryptocurrency as cash. So, I don't know if when you go to the bank and you drop cash into your bank account, that gets, I guess, a bit more scrutinized on a risk of compliance perspective, as opposed to receiving a wire transfer, just because you don't know where those funds come from.
Right.
And so FinTrack tends to see cryptocurrency as cash in that scenario, which is interesting. I think it probably makes sense, but it's definitely it's definitely more regulation in the space. And
do you think, being in the position that you are in the bridge to the, from these two systems, are you nervous at all that you're kind of, your whole business is at the whims of regulators and the political views on this thing, and that it might, with the stroke of a pen, be swept out from under you someday? Or what's your opinion on that?
So this is an interesting question. I mentioned Shakepay used to be a debit card. So we used to be a Bitcoin debit card. So if you had Bitcoin and you wanted to spend it at Starbucks or Amazon or whatever, you'd be able to issue a Visa card that was spendable in any of these locations. What you're describing, essentially happened to Shakepay. So about a year and a half ago, we had a card program. We had a ton of users across the world, mostly in Europe. We had revenue. We had a product, and it just took one email for everything to turn off, and we lost our entire program. Yeah, I'm dead serious. It was just an email. It said, "Sorry, thanks for your business. Your card program has been closed."
What?
And that's exactly what you're talking about here. It's being dependent on a third party to provide your service. And so I think about this very much. It's one of those. What's a good metaphor here? When you're young and you've gotten beat up a lot, and you tend to overcompensate when you get older. That's kind of what's happened here. And so we've thought a lot about this question. What if your banking partners? What if X service provider, closes your account? Are you able to continue? And so that's something that we've thought about quite a bit, and always worry about. Yeah, and it's definitely a risk.
Are you guys big enough or have the resources to lobby in any capacity or support, people that are lobbying?
Certainly, I mean, in Canada, it's a bit, it's a bit smaller of a community, so it's a bit easier to get your foot in the door. I think we could probably be doing a better job of it at Shakepay.
Yeah.
Frankly, I'm not too interested in the political side of things. It's kind of that like exit versus voice. I like to. I like to, I guess, express myself by building products as opposed to lobbying. We're not that company. We're not that type of of business. I think there's other folks on the block that are, but that's not really what we're
and
about.
I'm totally with you on that. The kind of Bucky Fuller mindset, but politics has its proclivity to just put its fingers everywhere and try to control everything,
Definitely.
which is why I ask. But so in the case of the debit card, so the card provider just emailed you one day. It was like, listen, we got to shut you off. That's it. And
it wasn't even preemptive. It was, your card program has now been closed. Like, it was,
holy shit,
we've pulled the plug already. Yeah.
And was that because they got political pressure? Because I know that a lot of different companies issued various crypto cards in 17, 18, and then they were cut. Yep. I think European Union holders could keep it, but for people in North America, at least, I think they were no longer allowed to have them.
So, most of the cards that you saw around that time were issued under the same card issuer, the one that we were using as well. And initially, without getting too much into it, essentially they were issuing cards for just about anyone in the world. And you can't do that. When you're a card issuer in a region, in a, let's say, Visa or MasterCard region, call it Europe being one region, Canada's one region, US is one region. If you're issuing card in a region, you cannot issue cards to people outside your region. And so what happened was Visa obviously came and said, hey, you guys aren't doing things well. Cut what you're doing, reduce it, or else we'll come after you. And so that's what happened. And so in August 2017, that's when most of these cards issued, including Shakepay, had to drop our non-European customers. And then in January 2018, 6 months later, is when I'm assuming they lost their Visa license, and following all the card programs that were under their purview.
Hearing you talk about it just seems like another one of those examples where there's two different worlds trying to come together, but they're just they're so incompatible. Like, one is predicated on circumventing or operating in a totally different capacity ultimately, and being designed to operate differently, but we're still wrestling around with trying to see where there's enough overlap where they can fit together, and it's to appease the legacy system and the political people in the government and politics, and to try to appease your mainstream user and that kind of stuff. But part of me, well, most of me just wants to be like, I wish we could do away with trying to, except for the on ramp. So I'm not referring to what you guys are doing because that's a necessary part of it. But it would be so much easier if we could just use the best system for the job. And I think a lot of us would be like, well, Bitcoin would be the best system a lot of the times. If you've ever tried to send.
But
yeah, go ahead.
To be devil's advocate on this point, I mean, it's almost like saying, I mean, you're comparing two structures and you're trying to fit them together. You would almost not want that to be true, right? It's a bit like the internet versus physical mail. You're effectively comparing bits and atoms, right? You're trying to fit them both to work together, and it's not going to work. And that's almost by design that it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Physical mail comes out. When the internet comes out, and you can send an email to anyone on the internet who's just connected. You didn't need anyone to physically move atoms to a different place. These are physically two incomparable or incompatible structures of governance of communication, and Bitcoin kind of works that way as well. You could think of it. I mean, the current financial state is almost like it's built on atoms because when you're sending money, you're not physically moving gold, but it almost feels like that. And the internet doesn't care where you are as long as you're connected to the internet. And so I think it's almost by design that this is not going to be incompatible. It's only through trial and error that things are going to kick their way through and work. And I think, yeah, I mean, look, I'm with you. I wish things were. I'm obviously in the space where I'm between both.
Right. Well, that's your predicament, but that's what I mean. Like what I meant was yeah, they're incompatible, and I know, many different people come up from many different angles and want to make it kind of nice and smooth and friendly to everybody involved. But the fact is, it's they're not really compatible.
They're not, and I think the biggest differentiator between the two is Bitcoin transactions are irreversible. It's so fundamental in its difference to fiat transactions. Any kind of fiat transaction can be reversed, except obviously a cash transaction.
Yeah.
But I think that's what changes almost everything. In Bitcoin, if you receive a transaction, has 6 confirmations, has 100 confirmations, it'll never be reversed. There is no clawback. There is no ability for some higher up to come in, pull it from your Bitcoin account, and return it to the sender. Whereas credit cards, wire transfer, I mean, all these money protocols built on the fiat system are mostly irreversible, and it just makes everything more expensive. It's just a different kind of flow, a different kind of mentality. Yeah. I mean, we can go deep on this. But I fundamentally believe in. I fundamentally believe that because these are two different kind of protocols, they are fundamentally incompatible. Although I would wish that they wouldn't be, because it would make my life certainly easier.
So, given that, what is your vision for Shakepay, if there is one beyond the existing services that you guys provide?
I mean, we think your entire wealth will exist in digital currency and digital assets. It's starting with money, so Bitcoin. You're essentially using Bitcoin as a savings account. No one can control it. It's your money. But the way we see the future is that at some point in the future, your entire wealth will exist in digital currency. Your house, your mortgage, all the stocks that you own, your equity, everything is going to be these bite-sized currencies on the internet, and Shakepay will be the way that you manage that. I think the way that we get there is by getting as many people into Bitcoin as possible, which is kind of what Shakepay is today. I mean, the goal for us in the short term is to get as many Canadians as possible owning Bitcoin.
Right.
That's how it's kind of how you flank the system.
Sure. And so tell me about the Ethereum integration. What's the, why and how's it been going? What's the interest level?
It was certainly bigger early on. The difficulty with Ethereum is certainly the technical aspects of integration. I think the obvious one is custody, right? Bitcoin has a battle-tested multi-sig system that is almost excellent. It's almost perfect. It's a great system. You can sign keys. You can sign transactions in different locations without having to ever bring the keys together, which means that it's ultimately secure in the long term. I think Ethereum is still somewhat nascent in this space, in that it doesn't have a defined protocol for multi-signature transactions. You have smart contracts, obviously, but as we've seen with some of the bugs in the recent years, those are not perfect. I'm obviously relating to the parity hack, and so I guess I don't have too much of a political view, if you want to call it, between Bitcoin and Ethereum, or the reason why we're holding Ethereum. I think in terms of innovation on the types of networks that are created on top of Ethereum, it's certainly very interesting. I mean, I don't know that I'd call myself a Bitcoin maximalist, though. If someone were asking me what currencies are you buying, I really only buy Bitcoin. But I think there's a difference here between something being useful or being valuable and its underlying token, let's call it, being valuable. Wikipedia is a really great service that is hugely valuable for the world, but I would probably not invest in the Wikipedia company organization, assuming that the value of that stock would go up. I kind of think of Ethereum in that way, and I think I think at some point in the future, things that are built on top of Ethereum may be valuable in the way that you can create tokens for just about anything. I think it's very, very difficult on Bitcoin, and so allowing folks to get into Ethereum is just a way to get more people into experimenting with different models of a network.
Yeah, and so if that being the case, why not offer more than just the two?
Well, that's where I don't see a utility in some of the other currencies.
Right.
If you look at trading volumes, you see what I think Litecoin's the next one. You probably have Ripple coming up soon afterwards. We don't see utility in any of these currencies, and it seems to me like those are mostly just there because they're there, as opposed to being. And if you look at the Litecoin code base, it hasn't been worked on in a couple of months.
What's the breakdown? I mean, if you can share or comment on the breakdown between on your platform BTC purchases versus Ethereum, just how much interest is in each one relative to each other.
It's certainly much higher on Bitcoin. Probably 3/4, something like that.
Right. And do you guys do much like education as part of your service? I mean, I know one thing I love about the app is that it's just super basic, and I think a lot of other providers in the space, both in Canada and outside, have gotten hung up before by just trying to offer too many features and make it too flashy and stuff. And it seems like now there's a couple of solution providers out there that get like that simplicity is good, especially when you're dealing with something that's new for a lot of people. And so I think that's great. But do you guys do like education on Bitcoin and why it's valuable and all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, we try to. I mean, we have a Learn blog. It's an educational blog. Has a bunch of blog posts about how to do things in Bitcoin. One of them is obviously how to generate private keys, how to own your own currency. We very much believe in that. We don't want you storing your Bitcoin on Shakepay. We want you to learn how to be a self-sovereign, to run your own keys, and to own your own wealth. And so, there's a blog post about how to generate private keys, how to store your own private keys. We also cover the mining fees, so we somewhat incentivize you to take your Bitcoin off of Shakepay. If you bought one Bitcoin on Shakepay and you're holding one Bitcoin in your balance, you send it on the blockchain, you'll receive one Bitcoin in your wallet. And so we built our system to incentivize people to learn how to be a self-sovereign. We believe that, and so I think we could probably be doing a better job of this, but we're certainly pushing in that direction.
And so, that is the case. You guys take the transaction fee, and I think there's 0% withdrawal fees, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
on fiat and on crypto. Yeah.
right. So how do you make money?
Yeah. So we make money on our posted rates essentially. We're marketed as commission free. And so when you go to buy Bitcoin, what you see is what you get. There's a buy rate and there's a sell rate. And the difference between that rate is essentially where we make our money.
Right.
And so just to give you a quick example, Alice and Bob, one is buying Bitcoin. Alice is selling Bitcoin. Bob is buying Bitcoin. Alice will buy Bitcoin, let's say Alice is selling Bitcoin at $11,000 per Bitcoin. And so Shakepay will trade directly with Alice. So we'll send her our Canadian dollars, we'll buy her Bitcoin, and then we'll sell those Bitcoin to Bob for just a bit under what Alice paid. And the difference is where we make our money.
But you don't publish
the
difference, right? You just publish a rate and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, both rates are visible. So we're quite clear with how we charge. We're quite clear with our buy and sell rates. So a user, when they go in the app and they say, "Hey, I want to buy $10,000 worth of Bitcoin," or "I want to buy one Bitcoin," they'll see the rate at which they can buy. They'll see the rate at which they can sell.
Right.
And so it's right in your face on the app. Yeah.
And where does a company like Shakepay get the Bitcoins that they sell effectively to customers? Where do you guys buy them from?
Yeah, so we're plugged into some of the bigger exchanges in the back end. So when we can't fulfill trades ourselves or we don't want to, we'll source them from a third party. We haven't published who our trading partners are, but they're the household names that you'll hear about.
Right. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, and I don't do it to be difficult or salacious or anything like that, but in the 2017-18 era, everyone got wrapped up to some degree in the altcoin ICO frenzy. I know when you were doing the card thing, I think there was some cooperation with Dash or something. Was there not? I thought Shake had some cooperation with Dash with the card. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so we were accepting back then. We were accepting Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and Dash. So there were 4 currencies on the debit card.
Okay.
That was it. I mean, there was no.
So you could just fund the card. You could fund the card with your Dash and then spend it however you like.
Yeah, that's right. Early on, we'd been approached by the folks in the Dash community, and I guess we had somewhat gotten well known in that space, and got to know a few folks in the Dash space, and so we just offered to accept that currency. Yeah, that was it. I mean, there was no investment, there was no monetary incentive for us to do so.
Yeah. What's if
that was a question?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to there was it wasn't a very precise question. I was just asking what the kind of relationship was. But what's from your perspective, what's the Bitcoin scene in Canada like? Like in Montreal or in Canada more broadly? Like, what's your take on what it's like now, and what it's like maybe vis-a-vis 2017? Well, obviously it was more active late 2017, but what's your impression of where it's at today?
I mean, it was certainly more active, and I think there was certainly more, and I think you'll see this around the world. I mean, certainly more people from all kinds of industries coming in with new ideas and new interesting ways of doing X, Y, Z. That you didn't necessarily agree with. I think what's cool about Montreal, I mean, Montreal is it's a low-key anarchist kind of city. I don't know if you know much about this, but in Montreal we're quite well known for, well, not quite well known, but there's so much of an underground. There's an adult industry, there's a gaming industry. And these aren't things that you see published on the internet, but it's quite it's quite developed. Some of the websites that you'll see in the top 100 websites are some that were started in Montreal, and so there's always this underground kind of folk that that like to build things that kind of go against the governments. And so I think what you've seen, yeah, I think what you've seen in Montreal specifically, and I think the scene's a bit different in Toronto and some of the other cities in Canada, but I think in Montreal there is a very big Bitcoin community, and there are a bunch of Bitcoin first, let's call them startups that are based in Montreal, and probably one of the most well known on Twitter is François Pouliot, who's a good friend, and his company, and there's a new custodian company called Knox based in Montreal as well, that are doing great things, and yeah, it's exciting, and I think as the bear market ends, or wherever we are in the cycle, you're starting to see folks really only care about Bitcoin, which is a great incentive, or a great folks to set of folks to be around.
Yeah.
Um,
Is there much, and I can't compare it to where I'm from because there's really not much activity in that regard there. But I spoke to Ben from BTC Sessions, and I think he's in Calgary. I believe he
nice.
also works with Bull Bitcoin now. And he said, it's still very blockchain, like corporate blockchain speak, and which almost shocks me. Of course, it shocks me because I'm a complete Bitcoin lunatic, so I'm deep down the rabbit hole, but I'm still, I'm somewhat surprised that it's, at this stage, especially after the frenzy in 2017. I mean, I recognize a lot of people got burned, and that's often a reason why people, keep it at arm's length for a while. But there's so much good information available now, and there's so many cool companies and service providers and stuff in the space. I'm kind of surprised that there's not more energy around it. But you're saying that's kind of different in Montreal, right? Is it like it's more palpable?
So the blockchain only thing, I think it works really well when you're talking with financial institutions that are
Well,
established
sure.
financial institutions.
They
It
don't
always
want
sounds
Bitcoin.
very,
Bitcoin's gonna fuck their shit up, right? They want a nice
yeah,
nice tidy
exactly.
little blockchain.
Exactly. I mean, it's easy for a bank to come in and say, yes, this new currency, this new token, this new network, you can have a little more control of over an established one like Bitcoin. So there is an incentive for those folks to come in and say, yes, let me partner with you. This is interesting. And frankly, I mean, I agree with you. There's nothing interesting there for me. I kind of get this speak when I go to Toronto. I go to Toronto quite often, and some of the folks that I meet there that are in the Bitcoin space, let's call it, are blockchain, not Bitcoin. Some of the folks that are a bit more in the established, like that work at the banks or any kind of a bank, financial service, they'll be very much blockchain, not Bitcoin, and it's frustrating.
What
And you
kind
try to help.
what kind of arguments do they make if you ever, like, not arguments, but you know what I mean? Like if you ever hang out with them long enough to
Well,
have the conversation, like what is the value prop that they see in blockchain and not Bitcoin?
I think it's the interoperability between the different, let's call them nodes in the network, not actually being nodes, that makes it interesting for them. But I think what I always try to tell them is, the blockchain is slower, it's more expensive, it's like there is no advantage for you to use a blockchain. Why aren't you using API calls? Like there's nothing in it for you. The reason you would use a blockchain as a technology is because you want uncensorability above anything else. Like that's the only reason for using any kind of blockchain technology, is that you don't want people to have to ask permission to transact or to interact with each other. That's why a decentralized or distributed system is more interesting than a centralized one. And there's none of that here. Anyone who talks about supply chain, who talks about identity or whatever, I mean, there is no reason uncensorability is more important than interoperability, let's say. And I think that's what people tend to not understand. Bitcoin is certainly more, you get these tweets about Bitcoin being cheaper to send wire transfers cross border. And I think that works for these really, really big amounts. But the real value that Bitcoin brings is its uncensorability. It's its ability to say, I don't need anyone's permission to build on this network or to send money to anyone else on this network. And you essentially pay a price for that in slowness, in limited transactional output. And I don't think that's what most people that aren't clear about what Bitcoin or blockchain is tend to get.
Right. Well, it's a direct affront to what they are. They are the people that grant permission, whether they're a bank or a government institution or something. So, of course, and they're hearing all this hype about blockchain and Bitcoin, like, oh yeah, what is it?
Why not?
It's the next big thing. And then it's like, well, we just want to remove some of these attributes, and then it's totally fine. And then you don't have the excitement is gone. The things that generated the excitement for that are gone if you remove those things.
Yeah, why not? I mean, it's always great. And I think AI is somewhat entering this phase. Though I don't know too much about this the AI space, but Montreal is one of these hubs that is developing into AI. We have a couple of big companies here. Governments are starting to pour money into companies, and it's getting to me like maybe we've gone on the other side of this phase, but. I think, just to end the point there.
yeah, let's end the point. Do you, this question gets a lot, we've been in the quote unquote honeymoon period with Bitcoin for the last 10 years, let's say. From your perspective, do you think that will continue, or do you think a greater showdown is coming as Bitcoin starts to kind of innovate and put pressure on existing systems? Where do you see that playing out, or how do you see that playing out?
I don't have a strong view on this. I think if you were to be conservative, if you're a Bitcoin conservative and you think that those people are after us kind of feeling, and you paint this picture of them versus us, then you would certainly think something is coming on that front. The governments are going to band together. Financial systems are going to reject all Bitcoin. Whatever it may be. I think if you were a Bitcoin conservative, you would think that way, and try to foresee what would come about and try to go around it. I think that's probably the right way to think about it. And I think the only way, or the strongest way, to fight against that is to get as many people into Bitcoin as possible. It's about convincing your fellow citizen to understand why Bitcoin is important, to get them owning some Bitcoin, even if it's $1 worth of Bitcoin, just to get them to understand how a private key works, why the network is interesting, I would probably be more in that camp.
Yeah.
And so Shakepay is really about getting as many people into Bitcoin as possible, because if you're the 2012 doomsday kind of folk, you think something's coming, you prepare for it. I think that's the best way to prepare for it.
Yeah.
I think anything like this.
Yeah, I think it's always prudent maybe to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I agree with you, because this conversation often gets directed towards, we need mining to be more decentralized, and we need more maybe mining hashing power on the network, so it's harder for state actors to compete, or we need better privacy and all this kind of stuff. And I understand those arguments, but I think I agree with you in that the way to make this the hardest to stop is that if tens, hundreds of millions, billions of people are actually involved in it, because you can't criminalize 1 billion people, you can't criminalize 2 billion people, and the more this is kind of a part of their life and they understand it, and they see it for what it really is, so they can't be convinced it's, for drug dealers and terrorists only, then I think politically it would be a much harder move to fight it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wasn't old enough to see the transition to the internet. I guess in my earliest memories, we were somewhat already connected with 56K dial-up. But there was a tweet going around. I think it was last week where some TV show host is like 1994. What is the internet? I don't know if you saw that one, but what is the internet? What is this internet? And it's like. And it kind of feels like that's what Bitcoin is today.
Yeah.
And you look now. My grandfather's on the internet. He's paying for his bills on the internet. He buys his tickets online. Like it's won. The internet has won. And it's easy to go back and say, oh, those people were wrong. But it's I don't know. I kind of get that metaphor when I think about this.
For sure. I think it was like a morning show with Katie Couric and some other people, and they were like,
okay, so
yeah, they were like, what's that @ sign? Because the @ a primitive version of the @ sign was for their email address, and they were directing their audience to it, and they're like, what the hell is that? What's the A? Is it the internet? So. Yeah, I think a lot of us feel that way, and that we're kind of the early adopters that are seeing this. And and I think if we just reflect on the last 5 years, I mean, more and more people are being brought into the space. It's being legitimized more and more, and so I just think that needs to continue, right? People need to understand what this is so that they see it as something that's a net positive for humanity, basically, and start engaging in it, and then it would be much harder politically speaking to do anything to try to stop it or dramatically slow it down. But
yeah,
I think
I think on that
no, go ahead.
I just think on that if you were very, very skeptical, it's the race between getting as many people owning and understanding Bitcoin versus the political cloud coming in and putting the brakes on it.
Yeah.
So
I think the fight will be potentially more vigorous because with media was not the fundamental component of state power the way that money is, but I think the process is playing out in a similar way. So perhaps that doesn't matter so much, kind of how tight their desired grip is on it, because it seems to be happening anyways. Okay, I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions now. So I don't know if you've checked out previous episodes, but this is where I'll just blurt out a question, and you can say pass. You can answer as short as long as you want, and that's it. You good to go?
Let's do it.
Okay. The first one is, what is money?
Money is stored sacrifice or stored resource.
Oh, I like that. Stored sacrifice. I haven't heard that one before. If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or someone over 80, what would you say?
Bitcoin is. I'm going to come back to this one. Okay. I like it, but I'm going to come back to this one.
What is the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Financial self-sovereignty.
What does the quote-unquote sovereign individual mean to you?
Oof, it means a lot of, being able to do, for me, I think Declaration of Independence kind of does this well. You're being free in your person, in your privacy, in your personal belonging. Fuck, I butchered it, but you get it.
I get it.
Person, property, and the pursuit of happiness. There you go.
Potentially controversial question, but how do you feel about potentially free speech rights and such being encroached upon in Canada these days? Do you see that?
Yeah, this is a big one. Yeah. I think in Canada it's oof. I mean, look, I don't know enough about this to kind of jump in, but from what I understand, it seems that you don't have those same rights in the U.S. that you do here, in terms of the Charter of Rights in Canada. There are a bit more of these asterisks that encroach upon your right to freedom of speech. I haven't thought about it enough to be, I guess.
Fair enough. How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it and purchase it?
Well, first time I heard about Bitcoin, I was walking down Boulevard Saint-Laurent in Montreal, and François Pouliot, who was working at the Bitcoin embassy, was giving out free Bitcoin, and so he gave out these paper. I think it was like $2 worth of Bitcoin, and so he shoved it in my face. He said, "Hey, learn about Bitcoin." That was the first time I'd ever heard of Bitcoin, and I ever received Bitcoin.
Wow.
And I think it took me about a year to really get my heels into it. But I think I lost that piece of paper. But that story is, I guess, the first time I really got into the space. Well, it's great. I'm happy that happened.
Advocacy works, man. Being that crazy person that says, "Hey, you got to try this stuff. You got to. I'll send you a little bit." I mean, look what it's produced. And I guess in his case, it's produced a competitor to some degree. But this is how it works.
We're good friends. But I certainly think back to that moment when we built Shakepay, and I think one of the reasons we've grown so fast is we talked about this and being able to transact quite fast, but it's also because it's really easy for you to also share Bitcoin on Shakepay to someone else, and so we get a lot of folks that come in and say, "Hey, I learned about Bitcoin because a friend told me. Sorry, I learned about Shakepay because a friend told me about Shakepay," and I tend to like those interactions because it reminds me of how I got into the space.
Sure. Along those lines, what's been your most effective method of educating people about Bitcoin? So in conversation or more formally?
I don't like talking about price. I really try to stay away from it, but I think if we were honest, to me, it seems like that's probably the most important indicator for those outside. The reason why so many folks got into Bitcoin in 2017 was because the price skyrocketed and it starts making headlines, and there is a social nature to something appreciating so quickly in value. And because Bitcoin's supply is so fixed, the price of Bitcoin is very reliant on its demand. And it creates somewhat of a bubbling up effect where I want Bitcoin, so the price goes up, and you want Bitcoin because the price is going up. And so everyone kind of wants Bitcoin because the price is going up. It's not sustainable in any way, but it certainly is. It certainly is a good way for folks to hear about it, to want to learn about it, to want to understand about it. And so I tend to not give financial advice. I tend to not want to tell people to buy Bitcoin. You kind of say, I'm Bitcoin, right? This is the Nassim Taleb. Tell them what's in your portfolio, not what to do. But I think price has a lot to do with it, and I would think if the price of Bitcoin were to skyrocket again, you'd get a flood of people to jump back into space. And,
sure. What movie or
I don't know that I don't.
Well, I mean, most people. I think you kind of answered in so many words what most people answer with, and they said, a lot of people say, orange coin good, number go up. That's what most people understand.
And I think memes are a really subtle way of getting the point across. I'm so with this. I think Michael Goldenstein had a talk a couple of months ago about this. I'm so with this. I think some of the best ways to get ideas across is through memes.
Totally.
And I think Bitcoin is getting there.
Absolutely.
Certainly on Twitter.
Absolutely. It's a revolution driven by memes in many ways.
Yes.
What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Your song. I don't watch too many movies. I don't know. Let's pass.
Can favorite? Okay, well that one's not going to work. Can Bitcoin be stopped? Well, I'll ask it anyway, just in case. Favorite movie clip or rant of all time? Is there like a rant or a scene from a movie that's your favorite of all time?
I really like the movie Gladiator. I don't know that it's maybe it answers the previous question. I like the movie Gladiator. I think it's one of my favorite movies. There's this one point where the gladiator, what's his name, Russell Crowe, pulls off his mask and he shows the emperor who he really is, and I don't know. There's some power to that vengeance that coming. I found that really. I think Bitcoin has that feature of he's really good in the arena. He's a doer. He's not a talker. And at some point, people are going to understand why. I don't know. Maybe there's something.
No, that works. I think a lot of people would like to relate, Bitcoin to Maximus, I think was his name.
Yeah.
Um,
My name is Maximus Meridian,
yes.
Commander of the North. Yeah, something like that.
Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
Yeah, I think we talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think if you're very conservative and you want to take a very conservative approach, you would think that people wouldn't care enough about Bitcoin, and therefore, calls to regulation and calls to political power would certainly be effective. Maybe. I think that's probably it. I think I'm obviously a bit more biased. I tend to see the person on the ground as opposed to the higher view of I'm not a miner. I don't really work in that space, and so I obviously understand it, but I guess I don't see for it the risks on that side. I'm more on the
Regulatory.
consumer side. Well, more on the consumer side, I
Oh,
think,
okay.
and I see what the common folk thinks about when they think of Bitcoin, when they buy Bitcoin, why they're buying Bitcoin, and yeah, I think probably the bigger risks are apathy towards the Bitcoin network and Bitcoin in general, and that would have certain repercussions to
Interesting.
to it failing. Maybe to me that's like a leading indicator for some of the other things that might happen, or
Right.
at least that's the way I think of it.
What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin? Something new that you learned?
I don't know if this was recent, but I think the moment Bitcoin really clicked for me was when I realized that the Bitcoin network really has this one objective that every little piece in Bitcoin kind of plays towards. The objective for the Bitcoin network, the only thing the Bitcoin network really cares about, if you somewhat isolate it, is network security. That's the only thing it cares about. It cares about being more secure, or the most secure network possible. And the way it does that is it incentivizes the different players in the system, right? You have wallets, you have Bitcoin owners, you have nodes, and you have miners. And the miners provide security in return for this Bitcoin, which is a token for providing, it's their payment, their reward for offering security, which is what the network kind of wants. And so miners are incentivized to provide more security because then they get more token, more Bitcoin. The nodes are incentivized because they need to run a copy of the blockchain, or the copy of the transactions, and make sure that all UTXOs, or all transactions that are coming through the system, are legit and are legit. I mean, essentially, they make sure that everything is kosher, that works within the system. And then the wallets, or the users, are incentivized because they own the Bitcoin. So they're incentivized to bring in as many people into Bitcoin because demand increases the value of that one token. And so this whole system works together nicely because it incentivizes the price to go up through the network becoming more secure. And if you think about Bitcoin only in those scales, then the reason people want more hash power is because it becomes more secure. And the more secure it becomes, the more secure it will become, and the more valuable the token will become, et cetera, et cetera. That was when I realized that was the moment that it clicked for me that this is not, I mean, it's not recent. I think it was a couple of years ago. But when that clicked, I thought, wow, Bitcoin is so well designed that it's almost unstoppable.
Yeah. What do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society? On whatever time horizon you care to speak on.
Ooh, I don't know. Look, I find it hard to answer these general questions because I don't know that everyone kind of thinks the way I do, or at least I don't know that I know how everyone else thinks, but I know what it's done for me. I've tended to, I mean, there's a lot of things that have changed because I've got into Bitcoin. You know, one of them is I save more, you know, I spend less. And I think you'll see this across the board that Orange coin go up. And so you want to save as many Bitcoin as possible. Each Bitcoin, the assumption is that the price of Bitcoin will go up. And so you want to save as much as you can now as opposed to spending it because the value of it goes up. I mean, it's a small difference, but it changes your mindset into a savings mindset as opposed to a spending mindset. And I think a lot of dominoes start falling once that mindset changes. And, you know, like I said, you know, at Shakepay, we interact with a lot of consumers, and you see those changes in theirs as well. So maybe you get folks to be a bit more long-term thinking, right? Time preference, you know, having a low time preference, and more folks saving means more folks can invest. More folks invest creates more wealth. I see a direct correlation. Maybe that's how it changes society.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to their reserves, and will they exist at all in 20 years?
I have no clue. I don't know.
What is the biggest?
But I'm sure it's happening already. You know, I don't see why they would. You know, like there's no reason for anyone to be public about this, right? There's no reason for any central bank to be public about this. So.
Right.
So why would they tell anyone that they're doing it if they weren't doing it, or if they were doing it? So maybe it's happening already.
Biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
Giving it away too much. No, but I think personally it's a big mistake, but maybe on a macro scale it's not. Oh yeah, that and probably not buying enough.
Sure,
I'm sure everyone has it.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he likely controls?
I certainly don't think it's a long-term problem. I mean, you'd want the coins to be as distributed as possible. This one user that has a lot being locked up, it kind of removes it from the pool, right, of coins that are available. If suddenly they start moving, you've quote unquote increased its supply a little bit. Maybe that's an issue short term. I don't know that it's an existential issue.
Have you ever purchased other coins? If so, are you likely to do so again in the future?
I have, yeah. In the future, I probably won't.
What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion? If none on Bitcoin, any subject is fine.
Maybe any subject. I've been experimenting a lot with diet. I think you hear about the term Bitcoin carnivory a lot. I'd been experimenting with diet quite a bit over the last couple of years now, say 3, 4 years. I used to be really big on triathlon. So you have to learn how to eat. You have to learn how to eat well, right, certain time periods. And then at one point I had stopped completely, and I'd started gaining weight, and so you start learning about how to start playing with the thing, input equals output, and you start playing with the food that you eat, and I guess the contrarian view here is I think a lot about nutrition is still yet unknown, and I think I think the result of diet is way more. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is I think diet is way undervalued in terms of how it affects humans, in terms of uh, any disease that you have,
Sure.
any way you're feeling, and yeah, I guess the contrarian viewpoint here is um, I think diet is a way undervalued aspect to our day-to-day lives than most people think. And I think in the next decade or so, we're going to start hearing more about why diet may be X, Y, Z reason for why certain things are happening.
Sure.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
No, I'm not doing this. I can't pass.
Why are you passing? I'm not asking you for an answer, but why are you passing? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, I have no clue. None at all. I think it's because it's, if I give you an answer, maybe people will hear about it, and then they'll make decisions based on that. And
Right, right.
I guess I don't want to put that out there.
Sure.
I'm buying Bitcoin, let's say.
Fair enough. Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
Morning routine. I It kind of jumps here and there. I'm an early waker, so I'm up pretty early. I'll sometimes go to the gym, but I like having my quiet time in the morning. If it gets to 10 a.m. and I haven't done, like, I'll get most of my day's work done before most people start the day. And I feel on the days when that doesn't happen, then I'm already behind. So, maybe not so much a routine, but just a general way of operating.
How do you define success?
Well, certainly different stages at different points in my life. When I was young, I thought success was obviously making money. I, you know, I think, how do I define success? I guess it's difficult to. You have a different goals. You have different types of success. I mean, there's a short-term success, there's a mid-term success, there's a long-term success. You have different stages of where you want to be in life. Um, I guess the only way to really think about success is being better off the next day than you were the previous day, something along those lines.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah.
And I'm going to ask you this before I forget because I always forget. But do I pronounce your name Jean Amiouny? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
What?
Jean Amiouny.
Jean
Amiou.
Amiouny. Amiouny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. Most impactful book you've ever read?
Uh, have you have you ever read Jane Jacobs? There's this one book
Nope.
that I read recently that I always think back to because it's not that it's impactful in its own, but I think it's so there's this book called Cities and the Wealth of Nations, and Jane Jacobs is this urban design city planner, and she's very famous for one book called uh, the death and life of great American cities, and she talks about why certain cities are so, why and how certain cities or certain aspects of cities create wealth. And in this book called Cities and the Wealth of Nations, it kind of jumps on top of uh, uh, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and defines what a nation is and how cities are the main unit of, let's call it, human governance for creating wealth. And I use that as a metaphor for all kinds of things these days. And I don't know. I guess I suggest reading it. I bought a couple of these books. I've just been giving them out to folks around me. It's worth a read, and I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin space would enjoy reading Jean Jacobs.
Where do you go to learn more about Bitcoin?
Twitter, probably Twitter and Reddit. I think the early days it was very, it somewhat hopped from certain networks to others. When I got in, Reddit seemed to be the right place to be. I think it's merged over to Twitter now. I also like to discuss a bit more privately, but I think in the public sphere, Twitter is probably the place I go the most.
Yeah. What's one thing, an important action that myself, anybody listening, can take to up our game in your area of expertise? Or so if we want to improve, what's one way that you think would be a good way to do that at this point in time? Related
improve generally?
Well, related to Bitcoin, if there's something in mind, but if not, sure, whatever you got.
In terms of Bitcoin, I would say read Mastering Bitcoin. You'll understand why Bitcoin works, how Bitcoin works, how private keys are generated, how wallets are generated, or why mining is important. You'll understand the fundamentals of Bitcoin, and everything else will start making more sense.
Yeah.
Even if you don't understand the math or the science behind it, it'll just give you a good overview. And I think, yeah, maybe it's maybe one of the building blocks in the Bitcoin space, but I really highly suggest reading it.
And it's free, so it's available on
That's right.
the GitHub, the Mastering Bitcoin GitHub. So yeah, if you don't want to fork out for the book, you can check it out there.
That's right.
One question you'd like to see added to this list, if any?
I haven't done many podcasts, so I'm coming at this at blank. Okay, I'm guessing I'm going to answer it afterwards, but I'd probably say, what are some of the more interesting Bitcoin projects in the space that maybe you haven't heard of or you have heard of?
Yeah. Now, before we break into the last part, yeah, you were going to get into the grandmother answer, right?
Oh yeah, how do you explain this to your grandmother?
Is that the one we said we'd come back to? It is, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. How do you explain it to your grandmother? It's funny because I tell my grandmother that what I do. And, she doesn't quite remember every time I see her, and then I see her like once a week, and she always forgets what I do. But I try to explain to her, I'm building this financial service, allows Canadians to buy and sell Bitcoin, and it kind of goes over her head. And so I've resulted to being an FX provider. So I allow Canadians to exchange currency. She's like, oh, so you're like a bank? No, not like a bank, but I get the illusion. But I think for Bitcoin, the way to explain it to her is, like, you can't even use the internet. At least with my grandmother, we've onboarded grandmothers at Shakepay, and they know what Bitcoin is, and they obviously know what the internet is. For how would I explain it to my grandmother? I would say something like, yeah, Bitcoin is this money that exists for the people, or exists with the people. and no government can control it. Something along those lines.
I'd like to hear her response to that explanation.
Maybe more confusing.
All right, so this is the very last part. It's a word association. I'm just going to say a word. You tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. All right? Nothing,
Okay.
nothing
Okay.
crazy. Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yeah, Jesus.
Government.
Slow,
Hash rate.
increasing.
The individual.
Sovereign,
Security.
important.
Ego.
Less important.
Greed.
Two-sided.
Stacking sats.
Saturdays.
What?
Saturdays.
Fiat currency.
$15.
Shakepay.
Shakepay is the cockroach that will never die.
Guns.
Leverage.
Altcoins.
Shitcoins.
Pizza.
Bitcoin for pizza.
Socialism.
Doesn't work.
Family.
It does work and it's important.
Trump.
Machiavellian.
Future.
Tomorrow.
Libra.
Oh, I don't know. Libra, Facebook.
Gold.
What comes to mind. Gold. Physical Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin. Final one.
Hey, Bitcoin will change the world.
Nice. That's all I got for you, man. Thank you so much for giving me the time this morning. That was super fun. Is there anywhere you want to direct people, or any destinations, anything like that?
Trying to be more active on Twitter, so you can follow me on Twitter.
Cool. Well, look, man, I wish you all the best. I mean, like I said, I'm a big supporter of what you're doing. So just keep up the great work, and I look forward to seeing how things evolve and change in the future.
Hey, thanks for the time. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, you
Thanks
too.
for having me.
All right, brother. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.